Welcome to our next Wandering Walks of Wonder adventure. Today we're heading to the historic city of St. Genevieve, Missouri. St. Genevieve is the oldest permanent European settlement west of the Mississippi River in present-day Missouri. The city was founded in 1735 by French-Canadian colonists and settlers from east of the river. St. Genevieve quickly became a thriving community due to its location on the Mississippi River and the abundance of natural resources. The city was a major center for trade and commerce, and it also played an important role in the fur trade. St. Genevieve was also a center of religious activity, and it was home to several churches and monasteries. The city played a significant role in the American Revolutionary War. St. Genevieve was a major supply depot for the Continental Army, and was also the site of several battles. The city was captured by the British in 1780, but it was retaken by the Americans in 1781. One of the first historic houses we come to here in St. Genevieve is the Jean-Baptiste Vallee house. Jean-Baptiste was the last commandant of St. Genevieve until the United States purchased the Louisiana Territory, eliminating the French-Spanish position in the area. His house served as a government center as well as a home. Jean-Baptiste built the house in 1793 when he moved from the old site of St. Genevieve along the Mississippi River. Perhaps Jean-Baptiste had to wait for official approval to move since he was the civil commandant of St. Genevieve. Jean-Baptiste built this vertical home on an especially thick stone still. Perhaps this would better ensure stability in case of flooding. Originally, the house consisted of two large rooms separated by a hallway with a central fireplace and having a hip roof. Eventually, the central fireplace was removed and fireplaces were built on the outer walls of each of the rooms. The hip roof was transformed to gable ends, accommodating windows which allowed for bedrooms to be added to the upper floor. Other additions during Jean-Baptiste's tenure are the built-in cabinetry in the dining room and the room dividing wall separating the dining room and sitting room. Later, a kitchen was attached by bricking in a corner of a gallery. We're now coming across the Felix Villet State Historic Site. First up is the Felix Villet House, which was built in 1818. This was designed as a combination mercantile store and residence for its owner, Jacob Phillipson, a Philadelphia merchant. Built of native limestone, its federal-style architecture demonstrates the American influence on the community in the decades following the Louisiana Purchase. The home was sold to the prominent Villet family of St. Genevieve in 1824 and served as the location for the trading firm of Menard and Villet, as well as the residence of Felix and Odile Villet. Holding firmly to their French traditions, including language and religion, the Villets embraced modern features of life, including an American-style home and American goods brought by steamboat. Around this area, there are 3 sites that we'll see: the Felix Villet House itself, the vertical log 1792 Amarillo House, and the 1819 Shaw House. As we continue our journey along the historic streets of St. Genevieve, let's learn a little bit more about the history of this thriving community. St. Genevieve was founded around 1740 by Canadian settlers and migrants from settlements in the Illinois country just east of the Mississippi River. As I've mentioned, St. Genevieve is the oldest permanent European settlement in Missouri. It was named for St. Genevieve, who lived in the 15th century AD and is the patron saint of Paris, France. While most residents were of French-Canadian descent, many of the founding families had been in the Illinois country for 2 or 3 generations. The area was known as New France, Illinois country, or the Upper Louisiana Territory. Traditional accounts suggested a founding of 1735 or so, but some historians document it as more likely being founded around 1750. Prior to the arrival of French-Canadian settlers, indigenous peoples of many cultures had lived in the region for more than 1,000 years. The best known prior to the historic tribes were the Mississippian culture, which developed complex earthworks at sites such as Cuyahoga and a broad cross-continental training network along the Mississippi-Ohio waterways from the south to near the Great Lakes. At the time of European settlement, however, no Indian tribe lived nearby on the West Bank. The region had been relatively abandoned by 1500, likely due to environmental exhaustion after the peak of Mississippian culture civilization at Cuyahoga, the largest city of this culture. At the time of its founding by ethnic French, St. Genevieve was the last of a triad of French-Canadian settlements in this area of the mid-Mississippi Valley. About 5 miles northeast of St. Genevieve, on the east side of the river, was Fort de Chartres in the Illinois country. It stood as the official capital of the area. Following defeat by the British in the French and Indian War in 1762, under the Treaty of Fontainebleau, France secretly ceded the area of the west bank of the Mississippi River to Spain, which formed Louisiana, or New Spain. The Spanish moved the capital of Upper Louisiana from Fort de Chartres about 50 miles upriver to St. Louis. They ruled with a light hand and often through mostly French-speaking officials. Although under Spanish control for more than 40 years, St. Genevieve retained its French language, customs, and character. Like other European colonists, the French held enslaved African Americans as workers. Most slaveholders had a few such workers, as they had relatively small farms. Some slaves were used to work in the lead mining areas around the town. During the 1770s, bands of Little Osage and Missouri tribes repeatedly raided St. Genevieve to steal settlers' horses. But the fur trade, marriage of French Canadian men with Native American women, and other commercial dealings created many ties between the Native Americans and the Canadians. During the 1780s, some Shawnee and Delaware migrated to the west side of the Mississippi following rebel American victory in the Revolutionary War. The tribes established villages south of St. Genevieve. The Peoria tribe also moved near St. Genevieve in the 1780s, but had a peaceful relationship with the village. It wasn't until the 1790s that the Big Osage pressed the settlement harder. They conducted repeated raids and killed some settlers. In addition, they also attacked the Peoria and Shawnee tribes. While at one point Spanish administrators wanted to attack the Big Osage, there were not sufficient French settlers to recruit for a militia to do so. The Big Osage had about 1,250 men in their village and lived in the prairie. In 1794, Francisco Luis Hector de Carondelet, the Spanish governor at New Orleans, appointed brothers Pierre Chouteau and Auguste Chouteau of St. Louis to have exclusive trading privileges with the Big Osage. They built a fort and trading post on the Osage River in Big Osage territory. While the natives did not entirely cease their raids on St. Genevieve, commercial diplomacy and rewards of the fur trade did ease some of the relations. Following a huge flood in 1785, the town moved from its initial location on the floodplain of the Mississippi to its present location about 2 miles north of the area where they originally inhabited. It continued to prosper as a village devoted to agriculture, especially wheat, corn, and tobacco production. Most of the families were yeoman farmers, although there were a wealthier level among the residents. The village raised sufficient grain to send many tons of flour annually for sale to Lower Louisiana and New Orleans. This was essential to the survival of the southern colonies, which could not grow sufficient grain in their climate. Built by a French-Canadian settler, this house, known as the Simone Horbedeau House, was built in the early 1800s. It's a limestone house with a courtyard filled with tons of antiques. As we've been going through our walk here in St. Genevieve, we've seen a large number of homes, many of them built in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Some of the oldest surviving buildings of St. Genevieve are described as the French Creole colonial style, and they were all built during the period of Spanish rule in the late 18th century. The most distinctive buildings of this period were the vertical wooden post constructions. These were walls of buildings that were based on wood posts either dug into the ground or set on raised stone or brick foundations. This was different from the log cabin style associated with the Anglo-American frontier settlements of the United States Northeast. The most distinctive of the vertical post house are called posts in the grounds, where the walls made of upright wooden posts do not support the floor. The floor is supported by separate stone pillars. As the wooden posts were partially set into dirt, the walls of such building were extremely vulnerable to flood damage, termites, and rot. 3 of the 5 surviving homes of this type in the nation are left here in St. Genevieve. Most of the oldest buildings in the city are what's called posts on a sill. One of the oldest structures is the Julien Dubuque House, built in 1792, which has been designated a National Historic Landmark. Julien Dubuque originally built a smaller house in 1770 at St. Genevieve's first riverfront location. Much of that house was severely damaged by flooding, and parts of it were dismantled and moved north to this community, where its new site was set in 1785. We're now heading up to and going inside St. Genevieve Catholic Church. This St. Genevieve Catholic Church is a Roman Catholic church. It was one of the first churches organized west of the Mississippi River in the United States. This particular building is the third Catholic church in St. Genevieve. The cornerstone for this church was laid in 1876. The cross was placed upon the steeple in 1879, and the building was consecrated in 1880. The Catholic faith first came to St. Genevieve when Jacques Marquette traveled down the Mississippi River in 1673. The parish of St. Genevieve was officially started in January 1759 by Jesuits who came from Quebec, Canada. Christian and Catholic history in the region goes back at least until the 1750s, although missionary priests from Illinois and across the Mississippi River may have visited the area much earlier. It is believed that a church was erected in the area around 1752 or 1754. In fact, the earliest marriage record dates back to 1759. The site of this present church has been used as a church since the 1790s, when an old log church was moved here from higher ground during the floods of 1794. An earlier stone church was erected on the site in 1835 and consecrated in 1837. The current church was built around the previous stone structure. In fact, the foundations of the previous log and stone churches are still visible in the basement of this present church. The present church was designed by Francis Weiss, a legendary pastor who served the parish of St. Genevieve from 1865 until 1900, and it's built in the Gothic Revival style. Currently, the church serves about 1,100 families and has nearly 24 relics inside the church. One relic belonged to St. Genevieve, the patron of Paris, and was placed around the neck of her statue inside the church. For decades, St. Genevieve was primarily an agricultural community. In fact, it may still be considered an agricultural community today. The inhabitants raised chiefly wheat and corn, as well as some tobacco. They produced more wheat than residents of St. Louis, and their grain products were shipped south, critical to the survival of the French community at New Orleans, which had the wrong climate to cultivate such grains. The village followed traditional practices. Most of the townspeople lived on lots in town. They farmed land held in a common large field. This land was assigned and cultivated in the French style in long, narrow strips that extended back from the river to the hills, so that each settler would have some waterfront. Only the exterior of the big field was fenced, but each landowner was responsible for fencing his portion to keep out livestock. The inhabitants used the same type of implements and plows as did farmers in 18th century France. They used teams of oxen to pull the wheeled plows. After the Louisiana Purchase in 1804, Anglo-Americans as well as German immigrants migrated to the village. It became more oriented to trade and merchants, but villagers retained many of their French cultural ways. The Sisters of St. Joseph, a French teaching order, established a convent in town whose sisters taught in the Catholic school. During the late 19th and early 20th century, St. Genevieve moved more of a manufacturing economy. There were numerous lime kilns and quarries from nearby cities, and the city also had numerous African American families who began to move into the community, including people of color of partial French and German ancestry. Today, St. Genevieve is not only a historic town, but a town with many visitors who come to view the old architecture and see some of the sites within the city. And recently, the National Park Service has opened up St. Genevieve National Historic Park to showcase many of the buildings, culture, and people who lived in St. Genevieve in the early times. I hope you've enjoyed this tour of historic St. Genevieve, Missouri. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next walk. Take care now. Bye.